So Tammi Jonas grows, butchers, cooks, cures, ferments, barters, and sells meat, veggies, and bread, and foments radical food systems transformations towards food sovereignty with armies of peasant comrades and allies on unceded Dajarak country and across the globe. Tammi will be speaking about farming, pandemics, and a conservation program aimed at enriching the global north. I'm a Facebook friend of Tammi's, and I just enjoy watching the photos of the butchering of what's being produced. So regenerative agriculture, my comrade Tammi does that day in, day out. Tammi, you have the floor.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here, Rob, and to congratulate you yet again. I feel like this is becoming a habit. And also to be here with so many comrades, and in particular to thank Rob for your camaraderie to farmers. I think that I know you're a comrade to many, but in my experience, the solidarity that you extend to farmers, in a very real way is wonderful. And I've enjoyed your friendship and working with you for several years now. So it's it's an honor to be here and talk about, I'm not really going to talk about COVID though, because, here in Australia, we dealt with it differently. That's not why. It is interesting listening to the American stories. If you can't tell, because Americans often can't, I'm actually American born. I was born on unceded Umpqua country in what's now known as Oregon. But I've been here 30 years, and I left America because it was grim in 91 and it has got a lot worse. And watching things unfold over there. I mean, I agree with VJ. It's ridiculous what's going on and who's in power. But it's kind of the same everywhere, in different ways. I think not all of us constantly have to deal with such mediocre governments, mediocre humans in government, but largely we do. I'm going to talk briefly. I'm going to kind of speak about the farm at the end, because I want to start by talking about what's been going on in biodiversity conversations, because in biosecurity conversations, governments are very reluctant to talk about biodiversity, I've discovered, at every level, local, state, federal, and global governance levels. And I wanted to share an anecdote that happened last week, because at the moment I'm tied up in a lot of biodiversity and biosecurity writing, actually, for my PhD, and also for the new People's Food Plan coming from the Australian Food Sovereignty Alliance very soon. So I was at a biosecurity workshop with the state government. And when I raised my concern that nowhere in their documentation had they mentioned biodiversity as the first line of prevention of biosecurity outbreaks problems, the room was quite silent. It was mostly large-scale farmers in the room, and then government. And the government literally said, "You're right, I think we've missed that in this year and a half of consultation we've been doing on a biosecurity strategy. It's a good point that we should be thinking about the role of biodiversity." And I thought, oh, we're all going to die. This is so bad. The good news is it's kind of opened up a channel to be able to talk to the biosecurity team here in Victoria, and they're actually interested. So we'll see whether we get some traction there. But another example of this happened recently at COP15 in Montreal, where we were advocating for the rights of smallholders and Indigenous peoples and our role in maintaining biodiversity as the world established a new global biodiversity framework. And aside from the tedium of 10 days in a COP with a bunch of public servants, many of whom, like Brazil, sent the last of Bolsonaro's minions, and it's like they brought a torch. They just wanted to burn the place down on their way out. It was a horrendous experience. We had some wins, but like some really weird ones. So we got agroecology into target 10 right after sustainable intensification, which Brazil would not let go. In target 18, Bolivia kept going hard on Mother Earth being mentioned in the framework, and there are several mentions actually, but there's a list in target 18 about the ways to fund some of the reparation work that needs to happen. And right under biodiversity offsets and carbon markets and blended financing is a bullet point about non-market mechanisms and the collective work of Indigenous peoples and peasants. And so it's like, it's a very schizophrenic framework. And I mean, I guess the hope we take from it is that we got some of our things in, even though the bad stuff is still all there. And so it's progress. I actually increasingly wonder whether that is progress, because I think about James Scott's stuff about legibility. We're making our movements more legible, and is that dangerous? So we're having a big think about the role of policy reform and which things should perhaps not be made so legible to the state to protect us. And that was a bit of an aside, really. But so I'm just going to then finish up by saying, you mentioned earlier, Rob, how do we help people survive the system as it is, and then how do we get beyond this? And the food sovereignty movement here in Australia and globally is doing exactly those two things. And our theory of change involves doing both at the same time. Here in Australia, we consider ourselves reformists and radicals. So we're trying to reform the system in the little bits to enable our movement to grow and more farmers to be small scale and diverse and feeding local communities. And at the same time, we are growing we are supporting those farmers to exit capitalist markets, to show solidarity with each other, to have land sharing initiatives like we're doing here on our farm, where we've just brought in some young market gardeners to run their CSA and farm here. We're doing that. We pay the rent to the local Indigenous people, the Jara, and we are not charging rent to the young farmers, one of whom is actually Indigenous himself, because we own this land and we have to deal with our white privilege actively, not just in principle and in words. And so those are some of the ways we and others in our community are starting to kind of enact the really radical changes that we need, that are happening in communities all over the world already. They just don't get the airtime that the assholes in charge have. And so I'll finish with two things. One is, you can tell I'm active in my own optimism, and I really encourage others to be too, because it's how you maintain optimism, is through being active. The Nyaleni process has started. So we had 2 Nyaleni meetings already in Mali for the food sovereignty movement to express, to collectively agree to what food sovereignty is and what agroecology is. The new one is not determined what the theme is, but it's probably a lot around the lines of ecological justice. And the point is to be a very intersectional process towards a gathering in 2025. And I really encourage organizations to find out how you can get involved just by going to the Nyaleni website, which is NYELENI process. And then I would say, in terms of being active, another thing we're doing here soon, which is one of my bright new ideas, there was a natural capital summit in Australia recently, and the commodification of nature, the financialization of nature continues. So we're going to host a What's Natural About Capital Summit. And I leave you with that in terms of organizing. Thanks.